All right, good afternoon. It is officially, I believe my time is 4:20. It is January 14th, Wednesday. So the CDC should update their wastewater surveillance site on Friday. So this information will be updated on Friday. So we'll see the information from the week of January 4th to, I believe, the 10th. But so far, we have data from around New Year's. So I'll be going over that today. So COVID-19, and then we have influenza A, influenza RSV, not influenza B, RSV here, and we'll go over influenza-like illness, which is not just influenza. It includes anything that has a sore throat and a fever, I believe. Yeah, fever plus cough and sore throat. And then we'll look at NRVSS to see what is going on with the CDC's testing for different pathogens. Same thing with BioFire, and then I'll look at respiratory hospitalizations just to give us a comparison of what happened last year, just to give us a comparison to what's happening now compared to last year, and then let's look at the CDC flu burden. So this should only take about 15 minutes at most. Okay, so actually we're going to start with epidemic trends. So in the vast majority of the United States so far, COVID-19, it seems like in the vast majority of states is peaked because the RT number is below 1. So what that would effectively mean is less than one person. If you have an RT of one person who's sick gets another person sick. But if it's less than 1, then that means your epidemic trend is declining. So less people are getting infected day after day. So that's usually once you have a large amount of population already infected or have been previously infected. Whereas in these areas where we have likely growing, the epidemic in those states and regions is still increasing, as there's still more people getting infected from each infected person, if that makes sense. So these places still have not peaked yet, according to the CDC. And we can also see what that would have looked like. Actually, I think here, but the table is not working. Oh well. Yeah, so that's for COVID-19. For influenza, in pretty much every single state in the union, the influenza is declining. So a lot of states have RTs around 0.58 in like Minnesota, but most of them are hovering from that 0.5 to 0.7 range. So the only state that's likely growing is Oregon, for example. And we could see in some of these states that have these very low RT numbers, their emergency department visits are very high. There's a lot of people who are infected in these states right now, just as a guideline. So the peak of the epidemic, the amount of people who were getting infected, who were being infected per infection, was around December 11th, where we had about every infection led to 1.41 people getting infected, but now we're sitting at a national average around 0.74. So I hope that makes sense. And I believe for RSV is a different map. So RSV, we have declining epidemic trends in the eastern states, although there's a lot of areas that have not changing, so they're around 1. But in the Great Plains and in the Intermountain West and on the West Coast, there are more states that are in the growing category for RSV. And we don't have that RT number here. I don't know why it's not working, but just so you know, in the Midwest, Great Plains, and the Western United States, RSV is still increasing according to the CDC's data. All right, so let's look at the actual wastewater concentrations. We're not going to look at every single state, but these colors down here will give you a pretty good idea of what transmission in the community is like, because wastewater helps us sample the entire community. Unless you're in one of these hash states that have these stripes to them, then that's limited coverage, and that's less than 5% of the total population. So data from these states may not be representative of the entire state as a whole. But the highest levels for COVID-19 specifically in the United States are particularly centered in the Midwest and Northeast. There are not as many low to moderate states in the South. There are some, and there are some very low in the West, but they're more high. The higher values are closer to the eastern part, closer to the Great Plains. The major reason for this is if we were to take a look at the wastewater graph here. I mean, just hit the national graph. Although the national graph looks like this hides a lot of regional discontinuity. So if we were to look at just the South, for example, the South had a much larger summer wave when it went up like this into the very high category, and they're still building up to this moderate category, but they're starting off from a lower position, right? So they had a lot more infections happen during the summer, so it's going to be harder to get to the very high transmission that we're seeing in some of the Midwestern states. As if we did a comparison with the Midwest, they had a smaller summer wave overall in terms of the amount of people who got infected, partly due to the weather in these areas being milder during the summer. So people are outside more, although that's not the full factor. It's part of the reason, but because the Midwest has harsher winters, more people are inside, so a lot more people are getting infected during the winter wave, similar to like what we saw last year at this time where the winter wave was comparable to the summer wave, and that was a very large summer wave nationally in 2024. It's not actually last year because it's 2026 now, but in 2024, the winter wave of 2025 and the summer wave of 2024 in the Midwest were comparable. Whereas if you looked at the South, just the South, for example, they're not comparable. In fact, the South wave was comparable to Jan 1, which is the second largest wave in the country. So let's also look at the West. The West right now is at very low levels after their larger summer wave, which is quite wide, as you can see here. So they're straddling along this very low to low boundary here. And the Northeast had a lower summer wave and it had a much higher winter peak here, but we are seeing an increase there as well for COVID-19 transmission. As far as influenza A, the predominant variant here is the H3N2 subclass K variant. So that variant was discovered, I believe, in the UK in June of 2025. It has caused relatively severe flu seasons in China, Japan. The UK had an early start to flu season. However, I still have to look at their data to see what happened there. But it seems like right now it is declining. So it seems like we're heading into the decline, like I mentioned with epidemic trends, where influenza transmission has peaked, it seems. We'll wait to see if it's actually peaking and we don't see a rebound like we did last year around this time, where we had our peak in February. But a lot of the states right now are in moderate transmission for the entire country as an average. We just came off of high transmission the week before this. So still a lot of places that have high transmission. It's more spread out across the board. A lot more places have moderate transmission, so we got rid of those. You can see the places that have low, very low, high, very high transmission. Less states in the moderate, but most of the higher transmission states are clustered in the eastern United States, not necessarily in the west, although there are some, including like Wyoming, Utah, that are in the Intermountain West that have high to very high transmission. There are some areas that don't have high transmission at the moment. As a comparison to last year, I'll actually get the full results in just to make it easier to see. So last year at this time, we had a wastewater signal that just got to about just under high at this time of the year. We just barely crossed very high, not very high, we just barely crossed high about a week ago. So the week ending in December 27th, 2025. But we're already starting to see the slight decline here. The only problem now is, do we see a rebound like we did in 2025 where we have a secondary peak that's much higher? Or is it going to be similar to 2024 where after this initial peak you start going down, but it takes a while to get down from there, where you have this long tail, for example? That's going to be something that we have to watch, but for now, it seems like influenza has peaked, but I'll keep you guys updated on this information. As for RSV, it's been a very interesting season because nationally RSV, according to wastewater, has been very low. There hasn't been that much RSV transmission so far. The highest wastewater viral activity is in the South. So that's where we see most of the RSV transmission in the country at the moment. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't see emergency department rises in most of the other parts of the country. It just means that the community transmission, when we're looking at the actual wastewater that we collect from everyone, doesn't show the same level of transmission. So transmission is in the South at the moment, and if we were to look at a regional trend, like compare this to last year at this time, and just get rid of all of these lines, you can see that this seems that we're at a very low point for this time of the year. At this time last year, because this is the 3rd, at this time last year, around the 4th, which is here, we are at the very high category. So we're very far behind in terms of RSV transmission. This lull has lasted a bit longer than expected. I'm not sure if this means that the RSV peak will be later in the year, like it will be displaced into February or March, for example. I'm not sure if that's what that means, because we haven't seen a rapid rise just yet. So I will be keeping an eye on this. Maybe the RSV season is displaced. Maybe RSV is just going to be lower this year. I doubt it, considering that these previous waves are roughly around the same height. So I'm more likely to believe that this is a displaced RSV wave and not just a lower RSV winter overall. Now, do keep in mind, influenza and RSV, they are seasonal, but they do have some variability in where and when they can peak, depending on like population variables, holidays, and the actual immune system in the population. Whereas COVID-19 is somewhat affected by the season, yes, but it's a lot more dependent on the immune population, the characteristics of the immunity in the population, as well as when you get new variants. So when you get a highly divergent variant from either a recombination or from a chronic infection where someone's been having the virus within their body, particularly their digestive tract, for a long period of time, usually months to years, and then it gets out of them. So looking at influenza-like activities, so this basically sums up everything. You could see that for the influenza week season, week 52, ending 2025, we were high. So this is when the flu season, or not necessarily the flu season, but when influenza-like illness around the country has peaked. As you can see, if we move forward to the recent week, we see lightening up of the colors. We're returning more to these high and moderates, but we still have a large amount of the country that has very high transmission or high transmission. So although we're looking in the right direction, right, transmission is still very high. It's still going to take at least a month, not a month, but still going to take at least 2 months to really get these levels down below moderate and even get into the low category. It takes usually until March is usually when you really start seeing that the flu across the United States, after certain people have been infected, really starts to diminish and fall off. Whereas rhinovirus, which usually causes common colds in people but can lead to severe illness depending on your medical conditions or your immune system at that time, or you're immunocompromised from a disease that you had or any other things that you're doing, that will take over the spring. So we'll notice that influenza will likely decline as we're seeing now, and then as we get closer to spring, we should start seeing like stuff like rhinovirus come back and be much more prevalent like it was in the fall, and not be subdued by viral interference caused by the flu, COVID-19, RSV. And also, because the flu will be going down, RSV and COVID-19 will have a better time because there's less interference, less people infected by the flu that would interfere with their own transmission. Looking at the NRVSS dashboard from the CDC, this is just a weekly percent of test positives for respiratory viruses. This is not a total number, but you could generally see the trends of when different respiratory viruses are most common. So rhinovirus in this gray here has dropped drastically since the flu has gained dominance. COVID-19 had a summer wave here, but it didn't have a large winter wave per se. Although a lot of people did get infected over the winter. Proportionally speaking, compared to previous winters, not that many. It doesn't look to be the same. Seems to be a similar thing this year, but generally, for it, influenza coming down would help it grow a bit faster in terms of transmission, because this won't be this roadblock in the way. So as you see, influenza when it was up high, RSV, COVID-19, and rhinovirus, all these other diseases were suppressed. But once influenza came down, other diseases capitalized on that, and they grew in response. So that's why I said rhinovirus will come back during the spring, because it usually does that after this viral interference period has ended. Now, you could look at different areas of the country. This is just a national, but you could look at region 2, and you can see a much higher rhinovirus peak here, and then much lower now compared to using the flu here. So you can use the NREVSS to check what your HSS region is, which is the same as your FEMA region, to see what viruses or diseases in general, just viruses, but are more prevalent in the amount of people, in the people who have been tested for a disease, for example. So you can use this to really explain and to help you understand like what's happening. All right, so BioFire will be the last overall trend to see what's happening for different diseases. So this is what we're seeing now. So according to BioFire, and this has more updated data, but this will get probably changed later. RSV is still growing as a percentage. It's actually been around the same. RSV has been around the same percentage of tests for a while now, about 4.7%. Influenza had peaked in the week of Christmas and is slowly starting to come down from its total percentage. So at peak, it was about 17% of the tests. Now it's at 10.8%. Rhinovirus is still coming down. Metapneumovirus is like plateauing. Coronaviruses in general are increasing. So I will look into that. And parainfluenzas are decreasing. So we're going to look specifically at influenza A, all of them, and we'll pull up RSV, and we will pull up all the coronaviruses, and this should be good to understand. So at the moment, H3 was the main subtype of the flu that's caused this major wave. H1N1, the 2009 swine flu, has not contributed that much this year. It's predominantly been the H3N2 subclass K variant that's driven the flu wave this year. RSV has been relatively constant, whereas SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, has been steadily increasing. Not very quickly, by any means, but it is steadily increasing. So it's at 3.1% now, whereas just 2 to 3 weeks ago it was at 2.5%. So it's slowly increasing. All of the common cold coronaviruses down here, including OC43, which caused the Russian flu pandemic in the 1800s, those are all slightly increasing. But it seems like they're not growing rapidly anymore. It seems like they're slowing down in their growth, so we'll continue to monitor this. Besides that, generally, since the flu's coming down, the flu in general is coming down, these other diseases will be able to probably take advantage of that. But we have to see, I guess, both what the weather is like and how much performance they actually do over the next few weeks. Because if we start seeing them go down, then they might not be able to do too much this winter, except for maybe COVID-19, which with that variant in Europe, BA3.2, and the mutations it's accumulating, that could be interesting to see what happens in both the spring and in the summertime. So we will keep an eye on this for sure. But BioFire is a pretty good resource to look at other infectious diseases. This is just for respiratory. We could look at gastrointestinal pathogens as well. So have all these different pathogens here. Norovirus, I know. E. coli, I'm not too familiar with, but norovirus does better in winter and spring, whereas this E. coli does a lot better in the summer. So norovirus right now had its peak around Christmas time, but it declined slightly. So it's at 13.5% of the test now, but we just look at the area. It's doing quite well, but it's now matching up with E. coli. So, and all these other diseases down here, which are other parasites or bacteria, they're down here. So they're under this 5% mark roughly. So if you want more information about that, I can make a separate video about this once I have more information. Okay, so respiratory RepsNet is the CDC's hospital surveillance network. So this helps us see the rate of hospitalizations across the United States by, not necessarily by state, but just nationally, right? So able to see it by pathogen, by age group, by race, ethnicity. We're only going to be looking by season at the moment, so we're going to compare where we are now to where we were last year. So last year at peak, we had a hospitalization rate combined of around 19.5. That was mostly driven by the second peak of flu. RSV and COVID-19 had roughly the same hospitalization rate around that time. And then after the flu really declined by spring, COVID-19 was the majority of the hospitalizations, as it tends to have been over the past 5 years. So right now, which is the end of this dotted line here, I believe I have 25-26. So right now, the 25-26 weekly hospitalization rate is 8.7 per 100,000 people. And the peak here would have been at 11.7. So just a little bit higher than what it was in 24-25. Yes, a bit higher than what it was in 24-25, but not enough to get it to this 13.4 back in 2025. So lower peak than last year. It looks also to be a thinner peak because we're going down a little bit earlier. But we have to see if the decline starts to slow down eventually. That's something that we have to look for. But otherwise, If it does decline steeply, then that will be better overall, just to save more people and to avoid more people ending in a hospital, having the hospital system be overburdened. If we look down here, COVID-19 and RSV are both lower than where they were last year, which is good to know. COVID-19 is actually, I believe, a full hospitalization number down than it was last year, so that's good. That's very good, actually. And if we were to compare it to, I guess, all seasons, we'll use a cumulative graph up to this point. And we're only going to we'll use the combined graph, because the combined tells us the total burden. The combined graph right now is just underneath last year's graph. The main reason that it's not any higher than this is because RSV and COVID-19 are not adding as much to hospitalizations as they were last year. And also the flu peak was a bit higher than last year, but higher than it was at this time last year. But because it's looking like it's already declining, it doesn't look like we're going to have a larger spike where we have this more rapid increase later here in this time period where we have the flu. We have the flu at a peak hospitalization rate around 13.4, really adding to those hospitalizations for another month or two. So this should begin to start slowing down quicker than it did last year. But I still think getting to 100 is definitely possible, at least before the end of March. I think before the end of the year, it will definitely probably get over 100, just simply due to COVID-19's existence as a virus. But 100 people per 100,000 as a cumulative hospitalization rate, I could definitely see being achieved sometime by March, at least. Because we are at 60-something right now. 63.6 is definitely possible. Alright, last section of the video. The preliminary 2025-2026 U.S. flu in-season disease burden estimates. So these are the estimates that the CDC has done since October 1st, 2025. So they've done this, I believe, since last year. Not the exact flu burden, but I believe since they've used the October 1st start date, I think since around 2023, 2024. Because they also did a RSV and COVID burden versions of this last year, but they haven't continued it this year. They should continue it. But according to the CDC, there have been 15 to 26 million illnesses. That's not infections, it's illness, so people who are symptomatic. And then medical visits, they have 6.8 at the low end to 12 million flu medical visits. 180,000 hospitalizations on the low end to 380,000 hospitalizations on the high end. And then at minimum 77,400 deaths from the flu at the bare minimum. And then at the absolute highest of the confidence range, they're saying there were about 38,000 flu deaths so far this season. So just so when you see articles that say their CDC says there's been X amount of flu deaths, they're taking the lowest number that they have. So when they say, oh, there's been 7,400 flu deaths this season, they're not saying that that's the exact number. They're saying that that's the lowest possible tally because that's what the CDC has estimated. That's the lowest it could possibly be. It's definitely going to be higher than that lower number. How much higher, though, is up to the discretion of the CDC when they're looking at the data and really examining where the deaths will fall. Usually, they don't go to the higher range. They usually are above the low range, but they're closer to it. So, like for the 7,400 deaths, if they go back at the end of the season to really look at the numbers, they probably will put the total death toll. Like, let's say the season got to 70,000 deaths peak as the highest range. They probably go with something around 20,000, for example. So that's a general idea of the flu estimates, because we never actually measured this many flu deaths a year. The top end, we never usually measure that. So that's why it's an estimate for all the deaths that we may have missed that had not occurred in the hospital, because people do die at their home, for example. All right, so I think this video is enough. I covered the flu season. I covered what's happening now in the United States in terms of infectious respiratory diseases. I will make another video update on Friday, and whenever the CDC drops another update for the wastewater, all the tools that they're using, just so I can really explain what's happening. So this video will be posted to my main channel, but I believe I'll add a collaboration to this. So thank you for watching the video to the end. Hope you have a great day and stay safe out there. I know there's a lot of different diseases, but remember, it is preventable. You can do stuff about it. So even if stuff is hard for you or you don't have resources, try to find them online, talk to different people, because infectious disease, it is preventable. You don't have to be sick. You don't have to accidentally get someone hospitalized, and people don't have to die. All right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you for watching.